after that 1-7 start that Key said would turn around and has. But
you disrespected us. You said we had no chance, and now look what position we're in, Zubin.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough. It is truly a remarkable turnaround. 0-5, 1-7 to maybe hosting a playoff game. So you've been a ride-or-die Giants fan your whole life, but if you ride on down the schedule right now, you're kind of a little antsy at this moment, aren't you?
Well, I know that we got the win in Seattle. Don't know what Russell Wilson was doing that game, but our defense came to play. Gallman was incredible. Colt McCoy was serviceable. Daniel Jones coming back. You know, you question that hamstring injury. How will he be? But I look at the schedule, having the Cardinals come in town. Then you play a Browns team that is playing really well right now, a Ravens team at Baltimore that has their back against the wall trying to make the playoffs. Then the Cowboys. You know, you hope that they can go 2-2 in this scenario. I get worried about, look, there's no wild card opportunity for the Giants. It's going to be the winner of the NFC East, and the Washington football team is just playing great football right now. They're playing really good football, and their schedule is easier on the back end at the 49ers, the Seahawks, the Panthers, and the Eagles. You're hoping that both teams can go 2-2. I don't know if I trust in the Giants down the stretch. I want us to make the playoffs. We talked about this yesterday. I'm afraid of how good the Washington football team is playing.
So
right
interesting. Now. The FPI chance to win has given the Giants a 49% chance to win against Cleveland, but only a 39% chance to win against the Cardinals.
Seems odd, doesn't it? Cardinals have lost 4 of 5.
Yeah,
Browns are on
traveling
fire.
And the weather and it's so. It's so
now
weird.
you wonder how the Browns will respond coming off their game against the Ravens. I think they play the Ravens this weekend, right?
They do Monday on ESPN.
Okay, so how will they respond off that short week? I don't know. It'll be interesting.
The Giants, to me, only need to win one game, right? 6 wins should be able to be enough for that division.
You don't think the Washington football team gets 2 wins out of the 49ers, Seahawks, Panthers, and Eagles? The Giants. That's what I get worried about, right?
Seahawks,
they're both 5-7.
Panthers, Eagles.
They'll get the Panthers.
The Panthers game will be an emotional game. So
the Ron Rivera coaching against his old team.
Yeah, that'll be an emotional game. Seattle needs to win to try to win the division and stay somewhere in the wild card hunt, obviously. I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. It's going to come down to the wire.
But the Giants have the tiebreaker.
If they were to tie out.
If they were to tie out, the Giants have the tiebreaker over them because they beat the Washington football team twice.
And you don't even have to worry about the tie out. Right now, it's a game in hand. The Giants should be operating like they have a 1-game lead, right? That's the way they should be operating.
They should be operating that way, but for whatever reason that they stubbed their toe along the way, they always got that in their back pocket. And then when you look at teams that are somewhat, I'm worried about down the stretch, I think, when I looked at it, depending on what New England did last night, which obviously they did nothing. I was going to say that it would be the Dolphins that would have to look over their shoulders, but I feel like the Colts at 8-4, because of Tennessee, I think the Colts the Colts are going up against the Dolphins, the Raiders, Tennessee to try to win the division, but if they for some reason lose to the Raiders, now they're in a wild card spot. They're thinking division, but then at some point they're going to have to start to think about being in a wild card spot because they lose to the Raiders. And I'm not so bullish on them, although the quarterback, Phillip Rivers, has turned things around slightly in not turning the football over at alarming rates or making you feel that way. But at some point in time, he could become Phillip Rivers. The pumpkin will go back to something at some point in time.
Now, that game is going to be in Las Vegas on Sunday. And one thing to mention, Key, and this is always something you want to bring up because it's the Raider audience, and you always have mentioned how they have the worldwide fan base. You mentioned the Colts, but this is a giant game for the Raiders because much like this Bucs-Vikings game, these two teams are right next to each other in the standings. It's a little bit different here. The Colts are hanging on to that 7th playoff spot, that 7th and final playoff spot in the AFC. This year we're going 7 in each conference, and the Raiders are right behind them in the 8th spot at 7-5. So this is a critical game for the Colts, as you mentioned, whether they're division dreaming with Tennessee or just trying to hang on, but this is a big game for John Gruden, too. Huge game.
Should have lost 3 in a row.
It is. Yeah. They took care of business last year against the Colts in Indianapolis, and that was kind of like a turning point for them, and then they went back to being the Raiders, right? I mean, and so when you look at it, the Raiders are not catching Kansas City within the division. They're not going to catch them. So their only hope to making the playoffs is a wild card, where Indianapolis can still win the division if something were to go south with Tennessee.
I just I trust the Colts defense, and the Raiders haven't been playing good football at all. I mean, they lost to the Chiefs in that game that they lost to the Falcons. It was just, 43-6 was.
Yeah,
damn.
They didn't play good.
Right, and then against the Jets, I mean, the Jets gave them the greatest gift of all time with that last play. I don't know if I trust their offense going into that game against the Colts.
Well, both of these teams have been Jekyll and Hyde for the most part throughout the entire season. They both have, and the Raiders are at home, much like you mentioned. The interesting thing about it is they play against a team, or better yet, Phillip Rivers is going to play against a team that's very familiar with his, tenure with the Chargers, whether it was in San Diego or whether it was in Los Angeles. So there's some familiarity with him at the quarterback spot. They beat up on the Indianapolis Colts, although he wasn't the quarterback for him last year when they went to Indy and won that football game. So, it's not the same because of the pandemic. It won't be crazy in Raider country in Las Vegas. But at the same time, you are on the road. You are in an unfamiliar territory and environment. And this game will be one of the nice ones on the slate.
We should mention that at the Chiefs, and this is obvious to Key's point, that they're going to run away with the division. If they win any of their remaining games, and I think it's pretty fair, they could win all of their remaining games, but if they win any of their remaining games, the AFC West is theirs. The interesting dichotomy here, this is interesting, Key and Jay. Think about this. Right now, Tennessee and Indy are both 8-4 football teams. They split their regular season series, each team winning on the other team's home field. But because of the way it works out, and Key makes a great point about where the Colts are at this point, the Titans sit there right now in the 4 spot, so they would be the division leader right now. They would host a playoff game, and having the very same record of the Colts, and they split the regular season series, but despite that, and having the same record as Tennessee, they sit at 7, and they are teetering, and that's why I think the Colts, this is as critical for the Colts as anyone else. I mean, they have the exact same resume as Tennessee, but they need a telescope to see them in the AFC standings.
Well, that's why from my standpoint, from last night to today, it changed significantly once New England lost that football game, which was like in the first quarter. But I started to think more about Indy and less about Miami in this situation because the Colts are now, the Pats are now gone.
Correct.
Miami could just play and get a spot. But Indy is, because of the Raiders situation, will be scratching and clawing.
Let's talk a little bit more about that other game in the NFC that has sort of that Raider Colt appeal, and that is the Bucs and the Vikings. This is a critical game, obviously, for Tom Brady. It's a critical game for Minnesota. There's been so much discussed from Tom Brady's side, but again, when you look at the Kirk Cousins money and you look at the expectations and you look at their coming off their first playoff win of the Cousins era, it would be such a downer. I mean, Minnesota fans, I guess, are used to it. We signed this guy. He was the best free agent quarterback in that year's class. We try to do what we can. We're not making the playoffs. We're getting there. The most coveted.
Yeah.
Let's go coveted.
Yeah, okay, go coveted. Because I was going to say they had a guy named Case Keenum that they could have just re-signed and probably been in the same position they've been in the last 3 years.
Right. Instead, they paid this guy 5 times as much, and essentially, in some ways, he hasn't had one season like Keenum had a few years ago when they were one of the best teams in the NFC. From Kirk's perspective, is it a sort of ride or die game for him just because, again, when you're making that money, it's all guaranteed, and you just have one win to show for it through 2 mega contracts. It's 1.5. He completed 1. He's now in another mega contract. 1 playoff win.
Every single game is that way for him, though, right? I mean,
it feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It is. I mean, he went through the streak of not being able to win on prime time games, which are, Thursday night, Sunday night, Monday night type games. He's struggled doing that. He finally got like one of those underneath his belt. And so when you look at it, I understand the money that they paid him, that starting quarterback money in the National Football League, and some would argue elite starting quarterback money in the National Football League, and he's yet to do the elite side of things. I picked them to win the division because I thought some of the moves that they made in the draft as well as in the offseason, it would certainly push them over the top for the lack of moves that the Green Bay Packers made or even Chicago Bears for that matter. But it hasn't – they've been a team that has started late. They got off to a late start, And they've kind of turned things around with Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson, a rookie out of LSU, and Thielen and Rudolph are there doing some things on the offensive side of the ball. The play-action pass game, Gary Kubiak is starting to get a feel for it. It'll be interesting to see if they can score some points, run the football on a Buccaneers defense that has been struggling. That's the important part about what they need to do to be able to have Kirk Cousins have a successful game pushing the ball down the field.
I also think getting out to an early lead, forcing Tampa Bay to throw the ball a ton, is obviously what's been leading to the demise of the Bucs.
No doubt. They have gone from 1-5. Key said the slow start from 1-5 to 6-6. So for all the criticism that Cousins gets, that certainly is in his corner. And you're right, they snapped that Monday